Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the secret to better service management for business teams. My name is Jamie, and I'm with ISOS Technology, and I will be your host for today's session. So if your team is overwhelmed with email chains, juggling shared inboxes, or simply struggling to keep track of requests, you are not alone. Business teams from HR to finance, legal to marketing, are being asked to do more with less, often without the right tools in place. So that's where Jira and Jira Service Management can make a huge difference. Today, we'll show how non-technical teams are streamlining their work, managing requests more efficiently, and improving visibility using tools that your company may already have. You'll see real-world examples and come away with practical strategies you can implement right away. So whether you're just beginning your enterprise service management journey or looking to level up, um, we're gonna cover all of the bases. So before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items to keep in mind. So the first is, yes, we are recording the webinar, so a shared recording will be shared with with you guys after the live session. And then if you do have a question during the presentation, feel free to submit them using the Q&A button. And we'll have a portion at the end dedicated to Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. All right. So now let's go ahead and meet some of the experts that are going to be joining us today. So we're excited to have a fantastic panel of speakers who bring deep experience in service management and transforming business operations. So let's go ahead and start with Lewin Trackman, who joins us from Genentech.
Hi, I don't know if you guys can see me.
Yay, yes.
Okay, awesome. Hi, I'm Lauren Trackman. I lead digital operations at Genentech. I've been at Genentech coming on 10 years, but I have a background in technology as well as advertising.
Thanks, Lewin. Next up, let's go ahead and meet Amanda Bass, who comes directly from the mothership, Atlassian. Amanda.
Hey everybody, Amanda Bast. I'm a senior partner solutions architect from Atlassian. I'm based in Texas and I work with solution partners like ISOS to deliver successful JSM and Jira implementations. So I'm excited to be here and share some of the insights that we have.
Thanks, Amanda. And last but certainly not least, we have our own Aaron Phillips from ISOS Technology.
Hey everybody, excited to be here. I'm the VP of Marketing here at ISO. So today I get to talk about not only what we do as an organization, as a solution partner, but also how we use all of the Atlassian tools internally, which I think is really cool because we're sort of our own best use case. So yeah, excited to dig in and share what we've learned along the way.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, everyone. We're going to go ahead and before we dive into some of the topics, we're going to do a quick poll. And so take a few minutes and go ahead and answer the question. So, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to managing internal service requests for your team? I tried to vote. We can't vote.
I did too.
Oh, yes.
I know, I was
That's
like, I
all right.
want to answer. These are good.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Let's go ahead. Can we see the results? Ooh, okay. So number one is too many emails and messages to track. Absolutely can relate to that. Second was, ooh, we have a tie. So no visibility into who is doing what and requests falling through the cracks. Excellent. We're also going to be covering um, tips and tricks to help with that. Um, and then everyone's has the tools, it sounds like. So no one voted for that one. And everyone does have a system, maybe just not the right system. So those are all good things. A few others, but thank you everyone for your participation. Okay, so next up, before we jump into some of our topics today, I wanted to level set And make sure that we're aligned by covering two important terms with examples. So starting with a familiar one is ITSM, or Information Technology Service Management. So while most of you have likely heard the term, how it applies to you personally might differ. So in the Atlassian world, ITSM is powered by Jira Service Management, which helps both IT and business teams manage service requests, incident resolution, change control, and self-service support via Confluence knowledge bases. Think of it as you forgot your password and need a reset. Or maybe you're an engineer scheduling downtime for a critical network patch. So, in short, it's the modern help desk for any team. Now, let's look at ESM, which is Enterprise Service Management, which Atlassian defines as ESM and an extension of ITSM. So, what it does is it brings service management principles to all business teams. So an example of that would be HR using a form in Jira to onboard a new employee or maybe track time off. Or maybe a facilities team wants to log restocking requests in Jira so that the manager can consolidate and report on those restocking items in order to fill an order. So the beauty of Jira Service Management is its ability to flex and schedule, or I'm sorry, and to scale to support both business and IT teams. Okay, so now that we've defined ESM and ITSM, let's move on to our next topic. Okay, so now we're going to dive into what ESM looks like outside of IT and how business teams are using JSM to manage service requests and internal operations. So we know that IT teams are using Jira, but now let's talk business and look at some real world business challenges Enterprise Service Management, or ESM, can help solve. The three big pain points I see consistently across organizations is around visibility, collaboration, and scalability. So starting with visibility, we've all been there. Teams are juggling work through emails, spreadsheets, or random tools. And so when your requests live in inboxes or siloed docs, it's nearly impossible to get a clear view of what's going on. Who's doing what is the status, how long are things taking, and honestly, just getting it done. So without centralized systems, visibility suffers and so does accountability. Next up is collaboration. And so this one's a big deal for our cross-functional teams. So when your departments are using disconnected tools or when ownership isn't clearly defined, work is getting stuck. And you end up with unnecessary delays, duplicative efforts, and a lot of back and forth. So ESM is there to help bring structure to that chaos by aligning workflows so that teams know what's expected and requests can be handed off smoothly from one group to the next. And finally, we have scalability. And so this targets maybe when you were a smaller org or in the early days, you had a bunch of processes in place that supported it. But as you guys started to grow, that patchwork of systems just isn't working anymore. And so those systems typically don't scale. And when we look at ESM is going to provide a framework that can help grow with your organization, create some standardizations while still being flexible and also providing bells and whistles like automation and self-service tools that can light the load and improve consistency across the board. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in and talk to our panelists about some of the real life experiences. So we'll start with Lewin. So at Genentech, can you share how your marketing team is using Jira Service Management to support intake and what value it provides to support integrations with other teams and support the user experience?
Yeah, of course. I know this is something that is very close to my heart. We've worked on this with ISOs for a very long time, so I'm really excited for it to come to life and really starting to see that impact. So our marketing team has more been using it to hand off when they're ready to kick off digital tactics. So I think of like when we're producing an email or social or media ad. So they're filling out that form to give us all the relevant information. And what's great about it is that as a marketer, you're not always thinking about all the details that a team needs. You may not also understand what some of those elements are. And so a lot of times that requires a lot of back and forth. A lot of time it requires our resources to review items and kick it back to them. This form really enables us to get that information correct the first time. And it really helps guide them through all of the details that's needed to ensure that we can actually take that work on. And our team on the production side of operations, we are fully embedded into Jira. And so really having that ESM form enables us to pull a lot of that information directly into where we are doing the work and avoids a lot of that duplication of data mapping. And as Jamie mentioned, I think, the really nice element around just being able to automate a lot of that notifications and assignments has also been just life-changing for our organization.
Awesome. Thanks, Owen. Amanda, what are you seeing on the Atlassian side?
Yeah, so from the Atlassian perspective, we're seeing, of course, a big trend around marketing. We're seeing big trends around usage in HR, but we're also seeing a trend in the financial and kind of regulated industries as well, with around kind of how they use change management, how they're rolling out broader initiatives to be more compliant and how they're acting and responding to like audit findings internally. So they're using JSM and assets to be able to kind of implement those, track those controls, be more compliant, be more up to date on those quarterly or annual type of risk assessments or evaluations that they need to be doing. And then there's a really big growing use of incident management to track things more along the lines of like alerting, security incidents that are happening and being able to kind of not only respond to those, but also mitigate those long term. So big trends in the financial regulated industries for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I've also seen just I love how JSM gives you that centralized starting point. So whether it's for intake in Lewin's case or it's incident management, maybe something happened and they needed to report an outage, you just save so much time if everyone knows where to go. So appreciate
Absolutely.
that.
And like even too in HR and like regulated industries too, they're using like the access management too, like who has access to which systems, making sure that the right people have the right access when you're onboarding and offboarding people, that people are getting set up and their provision, their access is being deprovisioned when they're leaving that team. So there's a lot of really good use cases in those areas.
Awesome. Well, thank
Jamie, can
you.
I jump in?
Oh, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
please.
There's a question in the chat which I think I can help answer with our use case at ISOS. So uh the question is, can you clarify how ESM is different from JSM? And typically, well, Jira Service Management is the tool, right? Like that's Atlassian's tool for IT service management. And when you think about ITSM, a lot of times that's more on the IT, the DevOps, the traditional ITIL practices, all of that. Um, Atlassian has sort of expanded on this concept and said, how do we bring some of those benefits to teams across the org? So not just IT, not just dev, not just technical. So ESM, that enterprise service management piece, is really bringing all these other teams into the tool, which is JSM, and getting the benefits that you get from that. So for instance, when Jamie, you were talking about that, centralized point where everything begins, at ISOS, we have a service desk and all of our teams are in there and we all have different request types and forms and things like that. So instead of someone, well, this still happens, but when someone slacks me and says, hey, I need this, I say, hey, can you go put in a request through Jira Service Management so that we can actually track it, make sure we're hitting our SLAs, we get all the right information that we need. And so we can route things to the appropriate teams at ISOS who are all using that same intake tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Erin. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our second topic. Um, Excellent segue, Erin. We're actually moving in that direction. So, next up is we're going to take a look at how different teams are using different tools. So, evaluating how business teams are utilizing uh, different types and combos of Atlassian tools. So I can say as a solution architect, I naturally gravitate towards technical conversations with my clients, which typically IT teams appreciate. However, when it comes to my business stakeholders, the priorities are different. And so they're focused on solving broad, complex challenges with many touch points and are less concerned with a specific tool that's going to get them there. So now let's look at how Atlassian taking both Jira and Jira Service Management can solve those complex business needs. So whenever there's a team that comes to me and has potentially an internal and an external customer that they're trying to support, Jira Service Management, I could say, is a must. So you usually want to implement something like that if you need to standardize an intake process, so creating that source of truth, automation tracking, SLAs, being able to validate permissions, anything like that, because it's going to help eliminate some of that chaos that a lot of folks lean into, like Google Sheets, or maybe a one-off email to somebody, and then turns out they're on a 2-month sabbatical, and so it just falls into the hole. So JSM does give you that source of truth to help track and resolve service requests efficiently while also creating that transparency. And then on the Jira software side, Jira software is going to be kind of your go-to for all things project management. So if you have your teams that need to act on service requests or potentially collaborate on work, Jira software is the place to plan, manage, and execute. It's flexible, scalable, and provides full visibility and traceability across teams. Plus, you can easily standardize the process by sharing configurations across projects. Um, I also can say that up until recently, I typically was seeing more Jira, like some folks would either completely 2 feet in, I just want to look at Jira, or I just want to use Jira Service Management. However, I'm seeing more of a combo happening. And so, what I want to kind of explore next is how our panelists can kind of share how some of those combos are happening and how it's supporting them and their teams. So Lewin, let's go ahead and start with you. So you've kind of shared how Jira Service Management supports intake for your marketing teams, but how have you used maybe both Jira and Jira Service Management together?
Yeah, I think just going back to what Aaron was saying, I do think that are a highly cross-matrix organization. We work with a lot of different partners, not only marketing, but informatics, compliance, legal. And what's so great is that we can really use JSM for that intake and that initiation for so many different types of workflows. But then once we start getting the work done, it really moves to Jira software. And I think when you're speaking to standardization, I do think that being able to have configured standardized workflows has been a big differentiator for us as we start really ramping up our offshore resources. And so they really focus on the actual content creation and pull through after that initiation from our marketing partners. And I think that, in a offshore resource model, I think everyone's aware it's not the same as an onshore model, right? It's not as effective where you can go across the room and have a conversation or email each other. So having these standardized configurations and workflows has been really incremental and like impactful and really standardizing and moving towards an offshore model. And then obviously where they're still connected with our onshore teams, our vendors and informatics for all of the elements to be able to actually deploy and pull it through. And so being able to see all of that for a marketer, understanding, from your intake point to where it is, where there's any blockers. And then to your point, we also have a lot of different folks coming in and off and ramping on and off a project. And so being able to have resources, just be able to pick up, a project, review everything, kind of understand where were the decisions being made very quickly has just been a life-changing experience for a lot of our teams, right? I think knowledge management and being able to track down decisions and emails are very painful. And so I do think that's a huge element that I'm seeing just a lot of growth and usage across our organization. But I would say that I think it's really getting the right information up front using JSM and then really having those standardized workflows and then those right fields has enabled us to just have visibility, not only for our day-to-day folks that's doing the work, but also our leadership, right? For me, it's really understanding what is the volumes, what are we seeing coming in, how much throughput are we able to get through, and like what are the resources that's requiring for us to actually get that work done. I do think that the two working together really enables us to have that line of sight, but also then enable us to more proactively plan.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Owen. Amanda, talk
Yeah,
to me.
so I guess I'll take some time here to zoom out a little bit and kind of talk how the system, the Atlassian system work kind of acts as a blueprint really for the success here and helping all teams accelerate and maximize their impact across your organization. So there's really four principles that we use throughout the system of work. The first one, obviously, is to align your work to goals. So making sure that all of your initiatives are really tying back to your business goals and what your objectives are. It's been shown that teams who have a clear understanding of what their goals are about 20% more productive. So this alignment also makes it really easy to govern kind of those more complex initiatives that span across multiple different teams. So that's where the system of work will shine, is being able to have all of these different teams, tracking all of their work across the same goals and laddering up to the broader initiatives. The second principle being plan and track that work. So Luann has talked a lot of great examples about how her team is, operating and executing in Jira and JSM, managing ownership, timelines, workflows, all of that is going to come into play. And that's really where the execution of all the goals that your organization have really comes to life. Um, Goes without saying, third principle is the unleashing that collective knowledge. So using Confluence and being able to have the documentation, your policies, collaboration, being able to, document decisions being made and why, and having access across the organization to be able to have information that people can use and, have power within their hands of that knowledge across teams. That helps you with better retros, healthy feedback loops within your team, always continuously improving. So, the Atlassian system work really, again, it's just kind of like building that blueprint for your teams, broadly speaking, to be more successful. And then, of course, realizing the full power of AI. So being able to be on the Atlassian platform and having your teams, all operating within the system of work, your AI capabilities are going to be super helpful and super useful and powerful here. AI is not intended to replace human oversight, but it's there to enhance. It's an accelerator. It's going to be able to, make your teams move faster and, start from places that are more helpful, generating content through AI that will, spin up documents and be able to make suggestions and make recommendations. So just accelerating that time to value. So between those four things, aligning your work to your goals, planning and tracking your work, making your knowledge available, and then really harnessing the power of AI across all of that, your teams are just going to overall see better outcomes. You're going to have faster time to value. Your employees are going to be more engaged. You'll get a much higher return on all the investments that you're making, both with the tooling and with your people and your staff. Everyone's going to be able to optimize all of their work and what they're going to be able to do. So just aligning all of that is kind of the holistic picture of the system of work, right? So everyone's kind of marching towards the same goal, and everyone has the tools that they have available to them.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels a lot if you have, if you just have JSM, that's great. You have a central place to kind of get the party started. But if you don't pair it with something like Jira Software and Confluence, you still fall back to some of those external tools. So there's a chance things still will fall through the cracks, or you start to fall back into emails or Google Sheets. And so it almost you need all three to potentially do an end to end and really be able to provide, the confidence and the visibility across both leadership and at the team level. So that's great. Erin, did you have anything you
I
wanted
do,
to?
yeah.
Yeah,
So
hit
no,
me.
just really thinking through it, system of work, and it's all kind of pieces to a puzzle. And the more pieces you have, the fuller picture you get. I think especially when you think about business teams, like HR is used to certain tools that really are more common in the HR space. Marketing is used to certain point solutions that are more common in the marketing space. So to really get the full benefit of consolidating onto Atlassian, you need JSM for intake, you need Confluence for documentation, you need Jira for project management. And it's the power of all of those together plus the fact that other teams are all working in those tools that I really feel like then that starts to compound, and that's where the visibility, the collaboration, the efficiencies really start to come to life.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's go ahead and let's jump to our next topic, my favorite topic, you guys. All right. Um, we are going to talk now about automation. So, how automation can increase your speed, improve your data. We're going to dive into what it is, where it can be used, when to include it, maybe when to wait, as well as hear from our panelists about how they are leveraging and implementing automation throughout their teams and processes. All right, so automation is everywhere, and Atlassian definitely has it baked into their ecosystem. So it's not just a trend, it is a game changer. Jira and Jira Service Management come loaded with automation features that can save time, reduce manual effort, and keep your teams humming. Couple of few examples. So in Jira, if you have a bug that is reported, instead of waiting for someone to get around to it, you can have automation on the back end instantly assign it to whoever needs to see that bug. So if it's your QA lead, if it's the project lead, if it's you want to split it. So maybe if it's a bug that's related to one team, it goes one direction and it can go another direction if it's another team. So removes the manual components of that. If you have a service ticket and maybe it's been resolved for 5 days, no response, automation can just close it for you to reduce, having a bunch of things open and maybe muddying up reporting for your teams. Another example could be a new incident is submitted. You can hook Jira up to Slack and it can notify your on-call team immediately. Sorry. So from a big picture, Jira software can help. Within Jira software, you have automation to support managing sprints. It can help with assigning tasks. It can update epics and stories, and it can also work with your stakeholders to keep them informed via auto comments. In Jira Service Management, automation can help with auto triaging, managing SLAs, sending reminders, and even updating documentation. So, all of this to say, it can save your time, it can improve your accuracy, and it also helps with scalability. So, whether you're a team of 10 or a team of 10,000, automation is there to support. Couple of words of caution though. So you certainly don't want to automate chaos. And so it's a very powerful tool, but you do need a solid foundation before you start to leverage some of the optimizations. And so a couple of best practices are number one, you want to start small. And so you typically want to pick one or two high impact use cases. Um, and then number two, you want to pilot with a purpose. So typically you're going to want to nominate like a small group of folks that can give feedback and participate in the pilot to make sure that the automation isn't doing more harm than good. So you want to validate that before you roll it out. The third big one is deciding on governance early. So you have to make decisions like, are Jira admins going to build automations, or do you want to open it up so project admins can also build automations? What this is going to provide is alignment to help prevent rule conflicts and also unnecessary clutter later on. Okay, enough talking, Jamie. Let's go to our panel. Lewin, at Genentech, can you share some of the ways automation is being leveraged for your teams and what problems it solved?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've already talked about this one quite a bit, but notifications and auto assignments has been life-changing for our organization. I don't think we realized how much time our resources were doing this until we started automating all of these tasks. And I think it's really created so much incremental capacity for us. I think when you're thinking about one project, it feels so insignificant, but when you roll it up to thousands and tens of thousands of projects every year, that's a massive amount of number that we're unleashing capacity for folks to really focus on more impactful work. And so I think that, when we talk about those two types of automation, they don't feel very sexy, but I think that those are two metrics that are very, very like impactful and creates a lot of capacity for us that we don't realize. I'll talk about two other ones that, again, a little bit sexier than like just notifications. But I do think, especially where I sit from an operational perspective, what I really look for and I get excited about is being able to get operational data to really inform where I should focus, right? Where should I optimize processes, where there's blockers, where are things slowing down? And a big piece that Jira really does is automate a lot of our metadata. There's so many metadata that we want to capture so we can learn from and get insights. But I don't want to have my team spending a lot of time manually inputting a lot of this. And so Jira has been great at automating a lot of the fields so that we get the data we need and be able to drive those decisions and optimize our process without really much work from our team. And so that's been a really, really impactful piece. I do think the other piece is just not having to manually map data, right? I think that as we're going through our like life cycle of a project, for example, every single thing hits our QA team, right? And they need certain data fields, they need certain types of materials, as well as different information to be able to complete their task. Historically, we would have to really pull that from so many different places to give to them again, right? But now it's like it's automatically flowed to them, included in their specific subtask. They get all the details without anyone taking any additional action, right? They don't have to sign, they don't have to fill out any forms. It all just flows from the larger Jira workflow. And so it's all just, I would say like removing at least 2 or 3 headcounts that's just focused on, I would say like the project management setup and requirements gathering for that team to complete the work. And so I would say those are 2 areas where we really automated a lot of the data flows and data mappings to really enable us just to remove the human element of really sharing information and informing resources when they need to take action.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Amanda, do you have anything what's your favorite automation?
Yeah, good question. Some of my favorite use cases for automation are um, we find that there are some organizations, I will say, that are still stuck in emailing the service desk. And I think the best use case I have seen so far for automation plus AI would be to use the Rovo triage agent to intake those or look at those emails when they come in, enact an automation that goes and uses the context of your Atlassian stack to make a recommendation of what the priority might be and who the assignment group could be. And then automatically apply that to the ticket. You can even put in a note that says like, we updated the Rovo agent updated it to this, this, and this, so that you can just know that it was AI that did it. Back to my earlier point, it doesn't replace human interaction, but it can help, right? So if it's right most of the time and we go look at it, then great. But I think that's one that like if you have an organization or you're a team of people who are like, man, I still keep getting emails, build the Rovo triage agent automation in there. Save yourself the time.
Awesome. That's very sexy, I think, out of all of them.
I was gonna
Right.
say, like, how have we waited this long to bring up AI? Like that seems
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Erin, what about you?
um ditto to everything that everyone said. I think one of the biggest use cases for us is more along the transformation, and again, this is a little bit of what Amanda was talking about, but of what comes in through JSM and then how it gets um, assigned and configured for our different marketing teams to work in Jira. So we even have people that like to work different ways. For a while, our design, our creative team was working in sprints, and like some of our event management team was working in a much more traditional kind of like Kanban board. So it was able to, and even going back and forth between teams, like take those work items and configure them in the way that made sense for that person or that team that was working it. And it could go through their workflow with the right fields and the right statuses and all of that. So we have an amazing marketing ops person who I just say, like, hey, is this possible? And then automatically it happens. So like, I don't know how, but like she makes it all work.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely
Yeah.
love how even with like going from product to product, so JSM to Jira software, you don't have to manually copy and paste, right? So you don't removes that completely by saying, hey, here's all of the information that came in on the ticket, and these 5 or 6 data fields are relevant to hand it off to team A. Maybe these other 4 or 5 elements are needed for team B in order for them to help resolve the ticket. So I love how it's flexible, but it also works across all of the tools, which is great.
Yeah, and I'll
So
just add, I feel like, Aaron, what you also speak to is all of the different visualizations, right? Like every team works so different. And I know that like for marketers, they may not want to be able to see it in like the ticket with all the fields, with all the details. And so being able to see that in a list view, I think is life-changing for them. But then when I'm talking about working with my offshore team, they may want like a Kanban view. And so I feel like having all of those visualizations and then kind of being able to cater that to the specific resources, I do think it's really great being able to see that not only on like Jira side, but also the JSM side.
absolutely. Yeah. All right. We're good with automations. Let's move on, ladies. Okay, so we have one more topic that we're going to cover. And for this one, we are going to take a look at how to roll out JSM and JSW without slowing your progress. So, rolling out any new tool can feel overwhelming. So, let's walk through some practical steps to help your team launch Jira Service Management or Jira software smoothly and confidently without slowing progress. One thing I often hear is concern around the technical side of Jira, so especially from teams who don't come from a tech background. So questions like, what if I break something? Or how am I going to get trained? Or who do I go to for post-live support? And these are all completely valid. To set your rollout up for success, here are a few common or a few recommendations. So the first one is start early. So make sure to give yourself time to align your vision, assess impact, gather the right people, and decide where to begin. Early planning pays off every time. Number 2 is pilot first. So avoid the big bang approach. Instead, roll out JSM or JSW with a single team or process. This allows space to test, gather feedback, and refine before scaling to other teams. Number 3 is standardize where you can. So, using consistent terms, request types, workflows, and naming conventions makes it so much easier when you want to report across teams. You can reuse assets, it scales much more efficiently, and it's easier to maintain in the long run. Number 4 is to train the right people first. So, focus on empowering your admins, project leads, champions, and pilot users. Create a safe work in progress space or testing project so that folks can go in and test without having to worry about impacting real data or adding a new you know a new implementation to maybe a production project. The last step is communicate and stay visible. So keep your stakeholders engaged with regular updates using Confluence pages, or you can also leverage Jira dashboards to report on progress, share test results, and highlight quick wins. Okay, so outside of that quick list, let's go ahead and talk to our panelists to see what helped them with rolling out JSM and JSW with their teams. So, Lewin, what are some tips or practices that helped you and your teams during some of your Jira rollouts?
Yeah, I would say definitely piloting is a big one that you mentioned, Jamie. And I would say that selecting like a wide range I would say, of resources when it comes to piloting, right? We know that there's going to be super users. We also know that there's going to be some folks that are not as technical and not as familiar. So being able to get that full group, I think, gives us a gambit of learnings. But also they become your champions, right? Like when we start scaling, they're bought in and they're the ones that could really speak to the success and really understand, especially those folks that were a little bit weary up front. And so I feel like just really spending that time with them, I think is so key. I mean, when you talk about visibility, it's bringing them along from the very beginning, right? Getting them bought into that vision even before they start piloting, so that they understand what is the end goal and what is the value for them if they really get invested into this pilot. So I do think that those are two key pieces of really being able to enable us to drive that change management. But we did a lot of really small things along the way as well, right? I think when we talk about visibility, we gave very open door access to all of our users early on to ask questions, understand what we're focused on, what our roadmap was. We stood up weekly office hours, right? We wanted folks to feel safe coming to us and asking the dumb questions and feeling like they can re-look at certain things or get refreshed. And we also really offered very catered, very timely training. From my experience, training is not going to be as relevant until you're in the thick of it and you're doing the work and when those questions come up. And so I do think that part of working with ISO is to cater those specific trainings at those moments and then be able to present like refreshes throughout so that when it becomes really relevant, then I think that was like a really big key piece to really ingrain it into people's roles and get them to really understand it much faster.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, that's great. Amanda, what about from the Atlassian side? More
Yeah.
tips, please.
So from our perspective, I mean, obviously you can work with great partners like ISOs. And I think just, echoing some of the same stuff that you guys have already said. I mean, I feel like I got nothing left to say here, but, just rolling with that autonomy with alignment is the way we like to phrase it. So I think, Aaron, you brought up a few great examples earlier. It's like, everyone does their work differently, and one team might be working in sprints, and one team might be preferring Kanban style. Luan, you mentioned list view versus board view. I think, it's just that autonomy to have things look the way that works best for you and work best for your team. But you all kind of agree on that system of work. So we all agree that we're using JSM for intake and routing of those incidents. We agree that we're using a change management process to roll out things that are going to impact our organization or could be risky. We're all doing compliance work and we're agreeing that this is how we're going to go about it and how we're going to label it and categorize it so that it bubbles up. We're all agreeing that we're gonna, use approvals through the system. So that's where it really comes down to the system of work is like we agree on how we're going to tackle this, but we still retain our autonomy to say we like list views versus board views. We like Kanban versus Scrum, that you still are able to have that because you're adopting the system of work broadly. So just autonomy of alignment, that's what we're going to go with. And, again, working with ISOs, you're in good hands to get yourself rolled out the way that it should be and set you up for success.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Yes. Well, this is good because I actually think we're answering another question in the chat. So kind of about that process of implementing JSM um, across an organization. Should you wait to get a whole bunch of teams started and kind of like go on your ESM journey at the same time you're implementing JSM? And I think there's a few different ways that you could approach it. Obviously, you probably want to get some core users up and running, like you talked about, pilots, champions, and a lot of the times we'll look at what teams is there going to be the most impact for first. And that's kind of where you might want to start. Because if you get some quick wins, other people start using it, right? Like if you get your IT team in there and people are suddenly having to submit tickets to IT saying, help we just went through this, we changed our access to certain things and everyone was getting stuck in this like, sign on loop. I call it the doom loop. And like, so everyone was hitting up IT, right? And suddenly you have to start submitting tickets for that, and people say, "Ooh, this is really interesting. Like, I feel like we could use this for my team." You kind of get some organic buy-in or some interest in doing some of that. So I think as early as you can, starting to gather those business requirements for specific teams, like what are the use cases? Where do you think this would be the most helpful for you? What would be MVP? Like what would you absolutely need to switch off of the spreadsheet or the other tool or the whatever you're using right now, and kind of gathering a lot of that information, and then deciding, from an organization-wide perspective, um, how quickly, how many teams to onboard at a time, but kind of making everyone aware, like, this is the process that we're going through, and this is the end goal, is to get everybody working in, the same tool, but in the ways that make sense for you to work. So I just very longly explained Amanda's autonomy with alignment.
I love that, Erin. And I do think, to your point, right, it shows up in the business impact, right? I don't think it's you do all of Jira software, then you do the service management. I think for us, we focused on the business need and those use cases, right? So for example, if you are doing Jira software with your core team, but a big dependency is really working with compliance, you may pursue JSM now for that specific use case. You don't need to wait for the rest of the organization to fully be on Jira software to start exploring JSM. If you have, like, to your point, this potential low-hanging fruit where you can start really scaling that use. And so I don't think that is really like get one thing really well done before you focus another thing, or really kind of thinking of like use cases that are like very wide reaching. For us, I think what was really effective was, what are those opportunities, and like where we're already working, how do we extend that? And if we're extending that requires using JSM, I think that like that's a wonderful opportunity to explore that and start showing people how those use cases may show up and how that solution will really address some of those opportunities. And so I think that it's more opportunities. And to your point of like, then people start seeing that, I think that was naturally then how people were like, oh, they're using it in this way over here in these use cases. Can we apply it the same way in other areas? And it just kind of naturally grew across our enterprise.
That's awesome. I also want to kind of go back to what you said around adoption. And so bringing folks along. I find that a lot of other applications, or at least there's this assumption with when you're starting to work on building out a custom application, that it's going to be very strict and the process is going to be really hard. Like if you make a decision, then you can't make a different decision after you've touched it. And I love how the Atlassian tools just allow you to quickly iterate. And it's easy if you bring folks along that maybe are a little gun shy to being part of the process, that they can go in, they can push all the buttons. They can say, "Ooh, I like that, don't like this." And it's quick on from a configuration side of the house to try different things. And so when you're first trying to get adoption or working with folks that maybe just haven't been part of a process like building out a tool or even been part of a back end of an IT program, it's very easy to come along for the ride and it's very safe. Like you can lock projects down so everybody isn't looking at it. You can do live walkthroughs and work with your team in order to say, yeah, okay, next you're going to go here, then you're going to go here. Hey, are you seeing an automation? Or is there a place for us to potentially automate? So it's easy to iterate. It's very flexible. It's not strict. And I like how approachable it is for folks. Yeah. All right. Anything else you guys wanna chat about here?
Mhm.
No?
No, I just,
Okay.
on that point,
Yeah.
I think, like you said, the flexibility, this is where a little bit of, either governance or like a best practice group or something like that. Like we continually look, even within the marketing team, like, hey, is this still working for everybody? Like we evolve, the business evolves, and so our tools are able to evolve alongside our practices as they evolve, which is really nice. But you do have to stay on top of it to make sure you're not, quickly working in a way that no longer fits the needs of the business. So that flexibility, but also the, I guess, rigor around like how often are we going to reevaluate this, I think is important.
Yeah, I
Good
would
call
agree with
out.
that, Erin. I do
Yeah.
think that like the governance piece is so key, especially to be able to standardize and glean insights. I think that like the insights piece and getting actual data to inform how we can improve this really, really anchors in the governance model, right? I think that like that's one area that I think is really valuable for us to invest in because it just really pays off in the long term.
Definitely as you scale, but also for that cross-team visibility. So if you are going to be creating custom fields, is the expectation that this is for one team, or are we going to want to report on this across teams? So having a governance practice really can help support those decisions so that, down the road or as you're scaling and maintaining, you aren't changing the name of things and muddying up across a bunch of teams when you thought maybe only one team was using it. So love that. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, I think we are at the tail end of the rainbow, everybody. And so, before we kind of wrap things up, um, and move on to some of the Q&A, we do have one more valuable resource. So if today's session sparked ideas about how your team can work more efficiently beyond IT, be sure to check out the definitive guide to transitioning from ITSM to ESM. So this guide is going to walk you through what it really takes to extend service management practices across your business. So from HR to legal, facilities to finance and beyond. It's packed with insights, real world examples, and practical steps to help you make the shift successfully. So we'll be sharing the link in the follow-up email and also in the chat now. So feel free to grab it and keep your eyes peeled on your email. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to our Q&A. So we have a couple of questions that have come up, and Erin, keep me honest here because I know we answered a couple of these. So the first one I've got here is how do you approach building automation workflows for teams who aren't tech savvy?
I'm
Building
trying to think,
automation.
yeah, who uh I think one thing, I mean, I will just say that obviously one of the nice things about JSM and Jira and Confluence is they are pretty friendly for folks that aren't super technical or aren't tech savvy. There's a lot that you can do, especially with templates. I know Atlassian's coming out with something specifically for HR teams, specifically for marketing teams. So there are a lot of ways to get started and take advantage of some of those automations, especially now with AI coming into the mix, where some of that can be built out a lot more easily without having someone who knows how to code or really has to understand the ins and outs of the back end. And um, it's not me that's doing any of this, but we have folks that are not on our IT team or our dev team that are configuring and maintaining these implementations and configurations for our business teams. So the marketing team can manage the marketing team, and the HR team, which we call people ops, can manage the people ops team. That kind of and I don't know, Amanda probably has better like examples of how it's easier for non-technical folks.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, I maybe there's an opportunity, if you're not technically savvy or if that's not something that like you want somebody on your team to get spun up on, man, Confluence whiteboards are a great way to like just use sticky notes and put your like what is your workflow? Like a non-technical person can easily build a workflow, like post whiteboard it out, and then maybe you do just hand it off to someone who can build the workflow really quickly, but they're spending the time building it, on a whiteboard. This, that, if this happens, then we go here and do that. They're like it's all their knowledge and their capability, like it's their process. So, that's a great way too to put it in their hands and say, hey, let's whiteboard this out. And then if we have to hand that off and remove the technical barrier, that's a great way too.
Absolutely. And on the back end, it's no code. And so I would say when it comes to starting to build automations, start slow. Pick something light. Go with an auto assignment or but but on the back end, you don't have there's no JavaScript. So you're just going, it's going to walk you through basically everything that Amanda highlighted. So the if then statements are, it's very approachable, but it's also very um, easy to isolate and test to get your confidence. So highly recommend like starting with a always having a practice project in Jira and using that as a way to explore and grow your automation knowledge for sure. Yeah. All right. So let's look at some of our other questions. So next one we have is how do you build alignment between IT and business units when rolling out service management enterprise wide?
And I can hop in here a little bit, Jamie. I do think that, going back to, I think the requirements are super key, right? If you're aligning on the requirements and the scope of what you're trying to achieve, I do think then you're surfacing not only IT's needs, but the business needs and where there may be overlap and really start trying to align to a combined solutions. I think, where there's always work that needs to get through is how do we really configure this in a way that works for both of us? And I think what's really nice about Jira, and I think Erin mentioned this as well, is the flexibility, right? Your requirements could be different, but how you visualize it, there's just so much flexibility with Jira to really cater to how you work that you can still meet IT specific needs and business needs. But I do think that it really starts with understanding everyone's requirements and where there might be alignment and difference.
Yep. I also feel like you need a bridge because IT is usually very specific of what they want. Business teams tend to also have a very specific set of use cases, and sometimes they don't see the connection. But if you have someone that can kind of pull them up a level, it's easy to start to see those overlaps. And I almost feel like Jira is a nice bridge tool in order to say, oh, okay, well, I also need an approval. Or, yeah, let's go ahead and set up routing. That makes sense. So we'll take these requests and you'll take these requests. So, and I also love what Amanda called out earlier too, is around using visualizations, like using a Miro board. So pulling two teams in together to like start to map it out so that they can see it really helps kind of remove some of those box assumptions that I think we all just tend to lean into because we're on isolated teams. So opening up the conversation that way, and then you can start to use the tools to create those bridges and work together.
I really like that, Jamie, and I think I really like, I don't know what we call it. I'm drawing a blank here, but being able to transform, because I think language sometimes is a barrier. When we talk about business minds versus technical minds, right? Like what we're calling something in Jira is not always what we call it from a business perspective. And I think it was really great is that on forums, you really can just name it whatever that speaks to marketing, and we can transform that into whatever feels that really makes sense for our IT partners wherever they work. And I find that like that connection really ensures that people we're speaking their language, but that work is still flowing and there's not confusion. And I feel like just when you talk about bridging gap, I feel like the biggest gap sometimes is just communication, right? In language. And I feel like Jira really gives that flexibility and you meet people where they are and what they're comfortable with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, y'all. Well, we are at time. So I really want to take this opportunity as we wrap up to thank you, panelists, for joining. I appreciate your insights and tips and tricks. And then everyone else, thank you for joining today's webinar. And we will be sending that follow-up email. So you'll have the recording, you'll have that takeaway so you can dive in deeper. And we'll see you next time.